There are three main variables that we can layer in to refine spatial pressure: distance, duration, and distraction. We want to strengthen and build the dog's ability to maintain a specific behavior or action while we increase the distance between us before we expect them to hold that position for any length of time, or while in the presence of something that is distracting. A simple example is when we want to teach the dog to sit in place while we go do something. Doing nothing is not rewarding for the dog, so their first instinct is not to wait in place. They're much more likely to want to follow us because what we're doing is probably more interesting. If we just expect them to stay in place without any history of it being a rewarding action, we're setting the dog up for failure and ourselves for disappointment. To begin working towards your goal of having the dog wait in place, start small, standing nearby. Focusing on distance as the first layer, take one step back away from the dog. Pause for 1 second, and if the dog does not move, take a step towards them, verbally mark yes, and reward them with whatever medium you're using to reinforce their behavior. Common rewards for this kind of training are physical affection or food. If the dog moves when you take a step back, pause and wait for them to stop moving. If they continue to pull closer to you, you can take a step back, but you do not want to step forward into their space until they're sitting down calmly. You're going to practice several repetitions of just taking one step back, pausing for a second, and then rewarding them. Once they've proven that they can hold their position when you take only one step backwards, start taking 2 steps back. Remember, only pause for 1 second after taking 2 steps back because we're focusing on distance, which is how many steps we're taking, rather than duration, which is how long we're standing farther away from the dog. As the dog is able to hold their position as you take 2 steps backwards, increase it to 3 steps, 4 steps, and proceed with that pattern. When you go to add in the second layer of difficulty, which is duration, you're going to go back to square one of only taking 1 step backwards. You'll work your way back up to adding in more distance because this is all about breaking the training down into the smallest steps possible in order for them to be able to grasp it the most efficiently and successfully. This is the technique of layering, which I also have another video about. When you take 1 step backwards, pause for 3 seconds. If the dog holds their position after 3 seconds, take a step forward and reward them. Practice taking 1 step backwards and holding for 3 seconds for several repetitions before taking 2 steps backwards and holding for those few seconds. Once you have worked your way up to taking 5 steps backwards while holding for 3-second pauses, go back to square one of only taking 1 step backward, but now hold for 5 seconds. Follow this pattern as you increase the amount of distance you're able to add, along with how long you're able to maintain that distance without the dog moving. The third layer of difficulty that you're going to add in is distraction. Again, go back to square one of just standing near the dog and choose an action that is minimally distracting, like pulling your phone out of your pocket and pretending to talk to somebody. Do that for a couple seconds, and if the dog remains unmoving, take a step towards them and reward their good behavior. Repeat this exact repetition several times before increasing either the amount of steps you take backwards or the duration that you're pretending to talk on the phone. Focus on either taking 2, 3, 4, 5 steps back or increasing the duration 3, 4, 5 seconds before you pair the distance and duration together with that distraction. Once you're able to take 5 steps back from the dog while pretending to talk on the phone for, let's say, 10 seconds, try increasing the level of distraction. Instead of talking on the phone, maybe you're holding one of their toys. You don't want to try to make them break their position by either squeaking it or waving it around just yet, because they are less likely to succeed with that much distraction in the beginning. Just holding the toy and showing interest in it is a decent enough distraction. By working with the dog through all of these hundreds of layered in little steps, the dog is going to build up a history of being able to remain in place for a much longer amount of time, with more distance in between the two of you, in a more stimulating environment than when you first started this exercise. The dog should only be expected to remain in place to the extent that you have trained with them, though. If you have only proved their ability to remain in place while you take 5 steps backwards and pause for 10 seconds before rewarding them, you cannot jump to expecting them to stay in place while you go to the other end of the house and have a shower for 30 minutes. The minimal extent of holding their position does not transfer to that ginormous jump in difficulty. The 3 Ds of distance, duration, and distraction are simple variables that you can consider when adding in layers to a training exercise in order to create a more solid behavior.